What's up, guys? I'm Cody. This is Cole. We're the founders of CJC Off-Road, and we're sitting down for another weekly question and answer session. All right, so jumping into the first question, the very first question we got is, do I buy a Ram 2500 or 3500? And this is pertaining to the 2014 and newer trucks, where the chassis is a kind of a completely different design, at least in the rear.
This is actually a very relevant question, as I just purchased a Ram 2500 about 2 weeks ago. So to answer your question, the Ram 2500, as a lot of you know, but some may not, is coil sprung as of 2014. Ram 3500 trucks are still leaf sprung. Both Ram 2500 and 3500 trucks can be purchased with factory air ride options. So if it's a 2500, it's strictly airbags for your rear springs. If you order an air ride 3500, you actually get coil springs and leaf springs and airbags in the rear. Why I purchased a 2500? The Ram 2500, in my opinion, is still the king in terms of ride quality on and off road. Even though you're somewhat limited in the rear, travel-wise on a 2500, you cannot beat the ride quality of a 2500 once you change to a softer rear coil spring. In my case, I don't tow much, and so it made sense for me, since it's just a daily driver, to go with the Ram 2500. So combining a soft ride coil spring, such as a Carli or Thuren soft ride rear spring, you really can't beat the ride quality on a 2500. That said, a lot of guys use these trucks as much more than daily drivers, obviously being heavy duty diesel trucks, and 3500s are really where it's at if you plan on towing heavy. Keep in mind, with a Ram 3500, you can still get a pretty good ride just by changing to Carli or Thuren leaf springs, but you can supplement that with airbags. We found that on the Ram 2500 trucks, if you try supplementing the weight capacity with airbags, it actually inhibits the ride quality so badly in the rear that you might as well have left the stock rear coils on the truck.
Yeah, I mean, the long story short, 2500 trucks, if you do not plan on towing like Cole, I mean, the most thing we'll tow is like a wakeboard boat or moving like a single car trailer. It's nothing heavy. The 2500 is king. These new coil spring suspensions paired up with a good quality, aftermarket suspension. I mean, the ride is unparalleled. I think like his new 2500, I mean, I'll compare it to like a Chevy 1500, like these new ones we rode in. I mean, they're pretty impressive. The 35, but the downside of his is, you throw a fifth wheel on it, it's going to squat pretty good, and you want to do something in the rear, and you start this domino effect of trying to supplement the ride, the ride capacity, or the towing capacity, I should say. While the 3500, like he said, you put this off-ride suspension on it, it's excellent. It is still where, like Carli suspension has been this whole time, extremely improved ride. It's just not as good as these new 2500s, because they were really able to take that and run with it.
So long story short, if you plan on eventually buying something super heavy to tow, 3500 is where it's at. If you don't, I really don't think you can be the ride quality on a 2500.
Or overland guys, please, overland guys, stop buying 2500s. It happens like once a week. We get a call, hey, I bought this truck to build like an quote unquote overland rig. I threw this camper in the back. It only weighs 2,500 pounds, compiled with a bunch of fuel, firewood, and now my truck's dragging on bump stops. What do? You bought the wrong truck. So for those of you who are building these trucks, buying them to build them, please, for your sake, not for us, buy a 3500. Like he said, there's a ton of steps you can take with soft ride leaf springs, airbags, things you can manipulate to get the ride good and still have the capacity. But if you buy a 2500, you've really put yourself in a corner, and those trucks just are not the best, especially when doing these super cool, like in-bed campers and things like that. Like we just had a customer, fortunately he bought a 3500 the first time, but he's, we'll probably do a video on that truck in the future. It's a long bed, brand new 3500, and it's getting a crazy camper in the back that probably parallels most people's like first apartments. It's nuts. So they're heavy, stick to a 3500. All right, so the next question we get probably 5 calls a day on tire pressure. So we will have a video coming again soon for tire pressure. We haven't released that video yet because we do want a really comprehensive video that can kind of explain you guys the differences instead of just telling you what pressure to run, tell you why you're running it. So with that said though, to just quickly talk on this, most tires have a peak weight rating, right? Like a Toyo MT will have 3,600 pound or higher, some of them, a 3,600 pound weight rating. Well, that weight rating is at 65 PSI or whatever's on the sidewall of the tire. Your truck, only weighs roughly 8,000 pounds like a modern day diesel. So you figure 3,600 times 4, you're the math major, what is that? 36, 70, what, 72? 14,400 pounds. That's your truck, that's almost double what your truck weighs. So what you want to do, you don't need that max pressure because your tire at that point is going to turn around and you're only going to be riding on the center of your tire. So a real quick way to tell is if you put fresh tires on your truck, they're up to 65 PSI, take a drive around the block, you'll notice only the center 4 inches of that tire have any contact. You have the wrong pressure. You want a flat contact patch, which is going to result in better tire wear and better ride as well. And this goes for basically any modern day diesel truck because these new trucks are pretty heavy, but they're not that heavy. They're not 14,400 pounds. And I mean, technically this applies even not on diesel trucks, you do not always want to set your tire where it's fully out on the sidewall.
Let's put it this way. Most of the time we see complaints on tread life on these, say like a newer Toyo or Nitto tire. Almost every time the tire's overinflated. By the time we see the truck, the center part of the tread's actually pretty much entirely worn down and there's still meat on the outer lugs. And so what you've done is you've actually shortened the lifespan of that tire probably by 10,000 miles, something like that. So
yeah,
something to keep in mind.
Now most new trucks, like his new truck, I think we got it from the dealership, and I think when we after driving on it for 7 straight hours through Montana and Idaho, I think the tire pressure was actually reading 90 PSI, which is insane. The truck asked for 80 PSI. The dealership or the manufacturer has to put it at that number because that's the max rating of the tire, and the rating they put on that truck requires that tire to be at max PSI. So if you're not maxing out your truck, you do not need to max out your PSI. So for Ford guys, new Fords, use the ForScan. It's a free app. There's a ton of YouTube videos on that. It's a free system you can use to adjust the pressure that your truck looks for. Ram guys, we have a video on the AEB ProCal. That's something you can just do in your driveway, take to your dealership, and they'll basically use a mode to save those settings you put in. And yeah, just stop driving at full PSI. You probably don't need it. So yeah, the scientific way of breaking this down is to find the load inflation table for your truck and then to weigh your truck, front and rear axle weights. And you can actually find out exactly what your tire manufacturer specifies for your air pressure. Now, most guys, don't know their front axle weight, don't have access to scales. You can pretty much Google what your truck weighs. You can kind of assume the weight bias is an extra 10% towards the front, thanks to the motor, things like that at least. And you can kind of figure out a good ballpark from there on what pressure to run. For instance, my truck is a newer Ford. We'll be doing a video and probably using my truck, but I'm running a 37, 13.5, 17 tire with about 43 to 45 PSI up front and a little under 40 in the rear. And my tires are wearing super flat and the ride is really good around town.
I run 45 front, 40 rear as well. I'm super happy with it. But again, keep in mind, you go tow heavy with the truck, you're gonna have to bump the rear up. So there is a little bit to this, which we'll be covering again in an upcoming video.
Yeah, if you haul every day, well, just stick to that maximum pressure and enjoy the bumps.
So another question we see frequently is, can I keep my truck at stock height and still improve the ride quality? That is a question I guess I'd answer with both yes and no. You can make the truck handle a little better by putting on, say, a nice set of Fox shocks, something along those lines with the factory coil springs. But keep in mind that you're always going to be limited by the spring rates. So what makes these Carli and Thuren setups work so well on these trucks is actually, or a big ingredient in that is actually the spring rates. So if, basically what you're doing is switching to a lighter spring rate up front and then pairing that with a custom tuned shock, and that is actually why these setups ride so well. The other factor to keep in mind is from the factory, your bump stop is so far from where it hits on the axle. When you go with a slightly taller aftermarket spring, you're actually increasing the distance from the bump stops to where they hit. That paired with a softer spring really does a lot in terms of ride quality. One caveat to that is that the Thuren springs for the newer Ram trucks, they actually do make a 1-inch coil spring, so it's fairly close to stock height. Whenever guys, call us saying, hey, what can I run, at stock height, that's usually a recommendation we'll give because, 1 inch over stock is barely taller. You're still running a lighter spring right up front, so that's, definitely something that we recommend for these trucks.
Yeah, 1 inch of lift standing 25 feet back from your truck, like you're not going to notice that, but you are going to yield, the better handling and the better ride, as he said. So many times we get phone calls of guys saying, "Hey, I don't want to off-road my truck. I don't take it to like Baja," which has been like a big push from on the marketing side from the performance companies, just because we're close to there and it's really easy to make cool videos down there. But I don't do any of that stuff, but I want good suspension for my truck. And the biggest thing when we talk about like suspension travel and those things, like Cole said, is once you go to a softer suspension, I think on the new 2020 Super Duties, you have like that much suspension between your frame and your bump stop. So if that spring got any softer, as soon as you hit something, your truck's going to bottom out, and you're really going to feel what bad suspension feels like, because you just eliminated your suspension. So the lift height is kind of key in the whole system in order to just allow more movement. And like he said, for guys, for like newer Rams at least, who have, or they just want to improve the ride with the least amount of lift, those Thuren coils, those are pretty good.
Well, keep in mind too, so 90% of what we sell is 2.5-inch kits to 3.25-inch kits. It's not that tall, so it's still very functional, and that is actually why we really like these kits, why we market them so hard, because they really are purpose built to keep the truck functional but improve the ride quality.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear from like all of our build videos on the channel. Like we don't build like big trucks, like SEMA trucks. Like we try to build good looking but still very utilitarian vehicles that can haul, go off road, commute, and all that stuff. And it's been pretty fun. So yeah, shoehorning into the very last question, why don't like Carli or Thuren or these performance suspension brands, why don't they make a taller, like a 6-inch, 8-inch lift? Because obviously those could still benefit from a good ride. On the new Rams, it is very clear. On a 2500, like a 2014 and up 2500 truck, go look at every lift kit that's like above 4 inches. You're gonna see an insane amount of drop bracketry in these crazy brackets for lowering the suspension. Dodge, when they built the suspension, it's very closed. So as soon as you go past those factory pivot points and that factory range of motion, it's pretty crazy. I would never put one of those kits on my truck. It's it's less than ideal. You're dropping everything. You're basically, if you can picture it in your head, or on a computer, you're clicking like cut, and then you're gonna paste the truck like 8 inches above, and you're just dropping everything. And that just makes for some really weird handling characteristics and things like that. So, then parlay that into wanting to build performance suspension, trying to make all that work really well and ride good, yet have the truck, yay high, is really tough.
Yeah, keep in mind with both Carli and Thuren, in the R&D process, the goal is functionality, and that is why they've come up with the heights that they've come up with. And we, after driving a variety of setups, we've had tall trucks in here. We've tried to diagnose steering issues on things.
Yeah, we've even had some of the crazy air ride, setups that are out there. And we've done 2 or 3 trucks where we had a heck of a time removing all those parts because there was so much cutting and fabricating, getting those kits on. But at the end of the day, the customers, were like, hey, it's nothing great, and I want to get something great on there. So we've actually swapped those setups off a couple times, and the feedback's been excellent.
It pays to do it right the first time. That's what they say.
Yep. So buy once, cry once is as we learn here. And yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to comment them down below. We're going to try to keep these question and answer sessions coming for just some quick, candid responses. Feel free to give us any feedback. Subscribe to the channel, give us a thumbs up, and we can't wait to see you guys on the next one.
Thanks for watching.